Hi everyone, my name is Lyndelle Peterson and I am the Stewardship Director here at the Australian Union Conference, and I am going to answer some of your questions about tithe. So firstly, what is tithe and why is it specifically 10%? Well, if you look at the Old Testament, in the original language, Hebrew, the word for tithe literally means just 1/10. So that's why we get this idea of tithing being specifically 10%. All the references to tithe in the Old Testament use this Hebrew word that literally translates as 1/10. So our tithe is basically 10% of our income that we return to God. I'll unpack that a little bit later. And it goes towards supporting the work of ministry and mission across the church. The really cool thing about tithe is every time we read about tithe in the Old Testament, a lot of those references have this promise attached to it. The idea is that tithe unleashes for us this blessing from God, and that when we give and we return our tithe, God blesses us in return. Which comes to the question, so why then do we give tithes? Well, God gives us a blessing in return, which is a really cool byproduct of tithing, but it's part of a much bigger picture in terms of stewardship. Some people use the term giving tithe, which actually isn't quite correct. We don't actually give tithe. It's not necessarily our generosity. We do what's called return tithe, because if you look at the bigger picture of stewardship, we recognize that God created the earth, God filled the earth, God created us, He gave us talents, He gave us time on earth, He gave us the ability to do our jobs, to earn an income. So when we talk about returning tithe, we're talking about this idea of taking 10% of what God has gifted us, whether it's the ability to earn a wage or that sort of thing, and we return it to God as a way of acknowledging that everything that we have comes from God. And all He asks is for 10% to be returned to Him. So I like to explain it to my kids this way. If we go through the drive-thru at Macca's and they want some hot chips, we order the hot chips, I pay for the hot chips because my children don't have money, and I gift the hot chips to my children. I give them to them. And we do what's called a mummy tax, where I return some of those chips to me because I've gifted it to them. In the same way, it's not a tax, but we acknowledge that everything we have comes from God. And so we return a percentage of that to God for the work of mission, for the work of ministry, in recognition and as an act of worship that everything that we have comes from Him.